In late September 52 BC, Julius Caesar climbs a wall of earth and timber that did not exist a month ago. Behind him, penned on a fortified hilltop, wait 80,000 Gallic warriors. In front of him, scattered across the far hills, burn the campfires of an army that has come to destroy him. Caesar ordered both walls built. He locked himself in on purpose.
The hilltop is Alesia, a walled town on a steep plateau in central Gaul. Inside it is Vercingetorix, the young Arvernian noble who did what Rome thought impossible. He united the Gallic tribes. All that summer, he had burned his own country's farms and granaries to starve the Roman army, and refused every open battle. Then his cavalry lost a single fight in open ground, and he pulled his whole army up onto this rock to wait for help. Caesar rode around the base, looked up at the cliffs, and decided not to climb them. He would starve the man who had tried to starve him.
So the legions put down their swords and picked up shovels. Around the base of the plateau, they cut an 11-mile ring, a trench 20 feet across, double ditches behind it, one filled with diverted river water, then a rampart 12 feet high, topped with a palisade, a wooden tower every 80 feet, and 23 forts. But before the ring closed, Vercingetorix played his own move. On a dark night, his cavalry slipped out through the unfinished gaps, carrying one instruction: ride home, raise every tribe in Gaul, and come back to break this siege. Caesar's answer tells you who he was. He did not lift the siege and retreat to safety. He ordered a second ring, 14 miles around this time, facing outward.
In the killing ground in front of the walls, the legionaries planted traps and gave them soldiers' nicknames. Boundary stones, whole trunks and thick branches, sharpened, interlaced, and anchored in 5-foot trenches so they could not be pulled free. Lilies, pits dug in staggered rows like the spots on a dice face, each hiding a fire-hardened stake as thick as a man's thigh, the opening disguised with brushwood, named for the flower they resembled from above. And spurs, barbed iron hooks set in wooden blocks, buried flush with the turf. Picture crossing that strip at a run, at night, under arrows. Every step is a guess. The wall itself is applied fear.
Now pause on something strange. Every detail you just heard, the 20-foot trench, the tower spacing, the nicknames, comes from a single book, and its author is the man in the scarlet cloak. Caesar wrote the commentaries on the Gallic War himself in a flat third person, where Caesar is always calm, always tireless, always right. It is a war report that doubles as a campaign advertisement written for the voters of Rome. So how much of it can we trust? Here is the remarkable part. When archaeologists cut into these fields in the 1860s, they found the ditches where he said they would be, post holes from the towers, buried iron hooks exactly as described. The walls were real. What Caesar thought and felt behind them, for that we have only his word.
Inside the town, the arithmetic turned brutal. Caesar says the defenders counted 30 days of grain and stretched it thinner. The relief army did not come, and did not come. In a council of the starving, Caesar gives the floor to an Arvernian noble named Reproductions, and puts a speech in his mouth that Roman readers would never forget. Better than surrender, he says, is to do what their ancestors did in the Cimbrian Wars, live on the flesh of those too old to fight. Almost no modern historian believes those words were spoken that way. It is Caesar the writer, showing Rome what kind of enemy Caesar the general was facing. But the decision that council took next was real.
and it was worse than the speech.
Alesia belonged to a small tribe called the Mandubii. The war council expelled everyone who could not hold a weapon. The townspeople's own wives, their children, their parents. They came stumbling down the slope to the Roman lines and begged to be taken as slaves. Feed us and own us. Caesar's account of his own answer is one cold line. He placed guards along the rampart and refused to let them in. Behind them, the town gates had already shut, so they stayed in the strip of dead ground between the fortress and the wall, days of it, starving in sight of both armies. Caesar never says how many died there. He never says what his sentries said, watching. He simply moves on to the next chapter.
Then, at last, the hills to the southwest filled with men. Caesar counts the relief army for us. 8,000 horsemen and 250,000 infantry, gathered from nearly every people in Gaul. Be careful with that number. It comes from the winner, and modern historians suspect it may be double the truth, or more. The bigger the wave, the greater the man who broke it. But strip the count down as far as you like, and the Romans' position reads the same. They were now the smallest of 3 armies on that field, and the only one facing enemies on both sides of its walls.
The first assault came by daylight, cavalry filling the 3-mile plain, and failed. The second came at midnight, a rush from the darkness against the outer wall, with a roar meant to wake the town into attacking the inner one at the same moment. In the dark, the attackers found the lilies. Men dropped into pits onto stakes. Feet came down on buried hooks that would not let go. The assault drowned in a field the attackers could not see, and by dawn, it had ebbed away.
But the Gauls had found the flaw in Caesar's ring. North of the town rose a hill too large to bring inside the walls. 2 legions camped on its slope, on ground that tilted the wrong way. Before dawn on the last day, 60,000 picked men slipped behind that hill and lay hidden. At noon, they came over the crest, straight down onto the weak camp, and at the same hour, Vercingetorix led everything Alesia had left against the inner wall. For the first time, the whole ring was burning at once, and every Roman was fighting with enemies at his back. What follows is the best day of Caesar's life, as written by Caesar. He stations himself where he can see the whole field and reads it like a ledger. This sector holds, that one bends. He feeds in cohorts 1 handful at a time. He sends Labienus, his hardest general, to the failing north camp. Word comes back that the rampart there is giving way. So Caesar strips men from the quiet stretches of wall, sends them ahead, and then rides for the breach himself. He tells us his soldiers knew he had arrived without hearing a word. They recognized the scarlet cloak he always wore into battle. The line turned. Swords, he writes, took over from javelins. Believe the staging or not, this much is in every account that survives. The North camp held, barely, and it held after Caesar committed himself in person.
Then Caesar closed his hand. Cavalry he had sent out through the outer wall earlier now appeared behind the attacking Gauls, on the open hillside, at their backs. The 60,000 broke. The relief army watched its best men run, and by the next night, the great host of Gaul was dissolving down every road it had arrived on. On the plateau, Vercingetorix had seen it all from the walls. Caesar's report of what happened next is almost a shrug. The leaders are handed over, the weapons thrown down. One line for the end of free Gaul. The famous scene, Vercingetorix in his finest armor, riding a slow circle around the seated Caesar, stripping off his mail,
sitting silent at his enemy's feet, was written by Plutarch, a Greek biographer, a century and a half later. The 19th century painting of that moment hangs in a museum today, and it is glorious. And it is not evidence. The surrender is fact. The theater around it belongs to everyone who told the story afterward, starting with Caesar himself.
The ledger closed the way Roman ledgers did. Caesar handed out the captives as plunder, one prisoner to every soldier, like pay. 2 tribes' worth were spared and sent home, an investment in future allies, and he says so. Vercingetorix was kept. He waited 6 years in a Roman prison for Caesar's political moment, was walked through the streets in the triumph of 46 BC, and then, per the custom for the star captive, was put to death when the parade was over. Rome voted Caesar 20 days of public thanksgiving for Alesia. The book that told them what happened was his.
You can stand on that plateau today. The town is gone, but the ground still remembers the ring. Crop marks where the ditches ran, iron hooks in museum cases, the post holes of towers spaced the way one book said they would be. That much is checked and real. Everything else, the calm, the timing, the speech about eating the old, the cloak arriving at exactly the right moment, comes to us from one witness, writing to win an election with a war. At Alesia, Caesar built a trap with 2 walls and stood between them. It worked twice, once on Vercingetorix, and once on every reader since who has watched this battle through Caesar's eyes, including, for the last 7 minutes, you.